It is the fourth model of the Digimon collaboration introduced in 2024, 3 years from the first run, based on the iconic Machindramon. It is DGM03 Mugendra Borg, with a kit of Max Shot, Hypercharge Buster, Cross Shock, Biped Legs, and the leg ability of Weapon Master, which converts a percentage of the leg's resist stats into power when attacking. Now, the Digimon collaboration is one that players have been begging, crying, and pleading to come back and make a rerun ever since its release first back in the year 2021 on April Fools, where it blew everybody out of the water. And that most certainly is no exception either with its grand return here in 2024, with the introduction of not one, but two and likely more models all the same. And Mugendra Borg is most certainly picking up right where the first three left off in terms of the power output they bring to the table. Max Shot on the head part is a shooting-based skill that, as long as the armor is remaining at 100% unscratched, the attack is a double damage and piercing attack, making it immensely painful and excruciatingly powerful as a first-time shot and attack to draw first blood of the battle. Now, if the part is not at 100% HP for whatever reason it might be, whether it be a shooting trap, an AoE skill, or anything else of the like, the attack then becomes a regular shooting attack with no piercing. But despite that fact, given that it already has almost 2300 base power, means that even as a regular attack, it's going to be fairly painful on its own. But if you can keep it unscratched, that nearly 5k that you can pack right there is going to be still really hard to ignore. Just do bear in mind that you do only get one shot of it, so do make sure you keep that in mind. Hypercharge Buster on the right arm is another conventional shooting skill that gets a damage bonus relative to the amount of charge in the user's gauge. Now, unlike regular Charge Buster, which will consume about 10 or even 5% of the user's charge gauge, and then also get a bonus damage relative to the amount of charge remaining, Hypercharge Buster is just a little bit more expensive. It'll eat a whole lot more charge, between 30% or 15% if it's capped at rank 5, but you also get a triple damage bonus instead of the usual double or even 1.5 that you would get relative with regular Charge Buster. So this one is going to be immensely strong and very, very powerful. But allow me to also make a clarification. Just because it is a charge-reliant attack does not mean you need charge in order to use it. So Hypercharge Buster is still something you can use fresh from the gate on turn 1. Just don't expect it to have anything obscenely powerful or have any adverse effects until you can get some charge in your gauge to really start cooking with. Cross Shock on the left arm is a conventional melee skill that has been most certainly making its rounds in current competitive meta. Basically put, it is a scatter type skill that will damage one part normally and then two others randomly for extra damage, but this one also is a sure hit and a sure crit, which means that upon using Cross Shock, you are guaranteed to make your hit, and it's going to be immensely painful even with it being a scatter type skill. Just do bear in mind that for the extra bonuses of that sure crit and sure hit, you do also have a no dodge and a no defend penalty on cooldown. So this will leave Mugendra Borg pretty wide open to punish for anyone that does end up coming behind the poor target, or even Mugendra Borg himself, to really lay it on hard and punish him for dealing that much damage so aggressively. Biped Legs means that he'll have relatively solid coverage across most terrains pretty reliably and some very well-rounded terrain compatibility, but his leg stats, being completely honest with you, with the exception of his evade, which for a very heavy chunky model like him he doesn't really need, is quite obscenely chunky. With a base mobility of 847, he's already off to a very solid start in the mobility department, and an evade of 772, like I said, it's not great, but given the fact that he's going to be focusing more on raw damage and just being as aggressive as possible, he's not really going to be focusing too heavily on dodging more or less at all, if at any point. Maybe every once in a while as he feels like it, but don't expect him to be dancing all across the field dodging attacks. He's going to be more likely tanking them than dodging them. However, he more than makes up for this with a very impressive melee resist of 1744, so he can most certainly hold his own up close and personal remarkably well and keep that damage on the low. But as if that wasn't enough, he's also packing an obscenely high 1849 on his shoot resist as well. Pairing both of these resist stats together means it's going to be very difficult to cut Mugendra Borg down to size, because he's packing some obscene damage reduction just between those two stats alone. Now when it comes to armor, that honestly makes the point even more so the case as well, with a head armor of about 4,500, right arm at 4,200, left arm at 4,259, and legs just shy of 4,400 means he is a very healthy and a very chunky boy. This is a model that is most certainly not going to go down without a fight. Between his damage reduction, his very solid base speed, but its aggression on the field is just as bad as well. And it's also worth noting that his cross-shock is probably one of the strongest that we've seen to date in the game thus far, even with it being a heavy part. All this being said though, as a pure set score, I still do have to rate Mugendra Borg a very solid 7.5 out of 10, and I really had to talk myself down into that without overhyping him as an 8. Primarily for the fact that while all three of his parts are obscenely powerful and he can kind of make them work to a degree, Weapon Master is another really big point that he has going for him. Because for every time he uses an attack, about 13-14% or so of that respective resist stat, melee for cross shock or shooting for hypercharge buster or max shot, will get pumped into his base power as extra damage, which can range between an extra 230 to even 250 bonus damage, which will be incredibly noticeable before any other modifiers come into play. So he's a very synergetic model that can work by himself on the field, and despite the fact that Hypercharge Buster is charge reliant, he doesn't necessarily need to be have a charge sustain in order to use it, because between that one use of max shots, if well timed, and cross shock, he can honestly make his own charge fairly solidly as long as he has the time to do it, and then finish off with Hypercharge Buster when he's ready. And as a word of caution, like I said, only one use of max shot does kind of hurt his overall viability on the field, but as long as you're able to fire it off relatively quickly and still land the hit pretty solidly, that's still going to be pretty decent overall. One really big point that he does have that does kind of hurt its overall viability though is the fact that even though his heat cool stats really aren't all that bad, between even high 500s to mid 600s or even low 700s, which is still pretty solid, don't get me wrong. Given the fact that none of his skills have a success stat of over 1,000, might still be a point for concern, because this means it's going to be much more likely things are going to dodge or graze him a whole lot easier and make it harder for him to land more consistent hits. As mixed parts, I do have to rate him at an 8 out of 10 for these same reasons as above. Now, Max Shot, Hypercharge Buster, and Cross Shock are all obscenely powerful attacks that you can use pretty much anywhere, and despite him being triple heavy and having gravity weakness for that respect, mixing up the parts is going to be really where you can cook some damage as well. Plus, having biped legs with triple heavy support, Weapon Master, and obscenely strong damage resistance like he has, makes it a set of legs, and even a set as a whole, that's going to be really hard to skip out on.